In this video, I'm going to show you how to wire a 30 amp 125 volt RV type receptacle. So stay with me and I'll show you how to get this done. Welcome back, and before we get started, I'm going to annoy you with that thing that all YouTube creators seem to do, and that's to ask for a like, subscribe to the channel, and click on that bell. So let's get started with the project. We've got a spot here in our front yard that's kind of perfect for parking an RV, and we've just got kind of an Arizona landscape going on here with gravel out front. So it works for that, and while we were doing some renovations and cleaning up the flower beds, the sewer lines here are only down about 1.5 feet, so I was able to dig that up, cut in a Y fitting, and put in the actual sewer dump as well for an RV. So at the same time, I added a water line. So it's actually a full service spot here, and believe it or not, as the internet electrician, all that's missing is electrical for it. So right now I've got a 15 amp that can be used, 120 volt just out of our household outlets just to charge a battery in the RV, but I decided I'd put in a 30 amp 125 volt RV type receptacle. So that's what we're going to tackle today. So a 30 amp 125 volt is good for most standard RVs, but the larger ones now come with a 50 amp 250 volt service. That's your larger fifth wheels and your Class A Motorcoaches and such. They can adapt down to the 30 amp, but I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to wire this receptacle using 8 gauge wire, and that way down the road I could put a sub panel in there, provide that 50 amp 250 volt receptacle, and then at the same time I'd have a little sub panel, as I mentioned, 4 circuits. So the 2 middle ones would be a 40 amp 2 pole for an RV 250 volt 50 amp receptacle, and then a single 30 for the 30 amp and a 15 for the 125 volt 15 amp standard circuit, just for a utility use out there. But for now, like I said, just that receptacle's going out there, but I'm going to use 8 gauge wire and 2 hots, a neutral, and a ground to provide for that. Now I'm just not going to use one of the hots, and I'm going to connect the 1 hot to the 30 amp, a neutral of course, and a ground, and just feed it for now with a 30 amp single pole breaker. And like I said, down the road we can make some changes. So that gives me the ability to do that, the flexibility, without going back up in that attic to pull a larger cable across in the future here. So my service panel is inside the garage. So this allows me to get down into the wall to that service panel, up through the attic to the other side of the garage here, and then down a brick support pillar that's in my front entryway, and that's where I'm going to mount that receptacle for now. On the outside, right handy for where the RV would be parked. Now make sure when you go to purchase your receptacle that you get the correct one. There are 2 different types and more with locking and such considered, but different types of 30 amp 125 volt configurations. There's the standard NEMA configuration, which is a 530R, and that would be for residential or commercial, not that common really. And the one you need is called a TT30R, so TT-30R, and they are strictly for RV and recreational vehicle use. So the most common type of 30 amp receptacle you might find in your home is the 30 amp 250 volt, and that would be for an electric clothes dryer that most homes would have, and that NEMA configuration is a 14-30R. So again, what you need, and write this down, is a TT-30R. So it's commonly known as a crowfoot receptacle, but it's got your blades on angles, and you'll see what I mean when we get further into the project here. So what I'm going to do here is first go out and cut and measure to length my conduit that's going to go up that pillar, cut the hole in the soffit so that that conduit goes up into the soffit where I can feed my cable down, and then I'm going to mark and drill all the holes in the brick. I've got 4 screws to hold the box on and 2 straps, so that's 4 more screws to drill holes for. And then I'm going to come inside the garage here and wire all this inside here so that I can give you a really good look at how to get it done. So I'll feed the wire in through the conduit to the box, do all the connections, put it together, then we'll go outside and I'll feed the cable up through that hole and pull the cable in through the attic, and when it's all done I can slide that conduit up into place and put in the screws to hold everything in place. Okay, so before we go outside to mount all this and drill our holes, as I mentioned, here's the box I'm going to use. It's a standard PVC FS box with 1/2 inch inlet, nothing else. And conduit, you can go buy this in 10-foot lengths. So I had a chunk laying around that should be about the right length. If it's not, I'll cut it. And when we're done, we'll be gluing that on with some PVC cement. But now let's go outside, lay this up against the brick pillar, slide it up to the soffit and see where we need to drill a hole into the soffit. Okay, so here's the location of that RV receptacle and the future panel and full RV service, should I decide to go that way. Right there on that brick pillar, right in the corner, right by the front porch, and you see the garage in the background there. So you see that conduit leaning there against the pillar. I'm going to push that up, find a good area on the bricks where my concrete screws will drill in nicely to the bricks. I'm going to need 4 to 8 of these screws. I might need 1 or 2 straps going up. Then I'm going to mark that where it's going to go up through the soffit there, and that's where I will take the finished assembly with the wire and everything all slid through the conduit at this end, and I'll push that cable up through the soffit. Then I'll crawl up into the attic and try to pull that across to the panel. So I'm going to mark that location and get that mounted. I'll drill that hole and get this in place. Alright, so if I line that conduit going up the pillar, when you look up above, I'll show you the location. It's going to go right into the soffit, right in the middle of a section there, so that should be nice and easy to drill. And then this box, of course, is going to finish about 1 foot higher than where I've got it now when I shove that conduit up into the soffit. Okay, so there's the hole up through the soffit. I just used my cordless drill and a unibit to get that hole done. Now when I shove the conduit up through there, it goes up about 12 to 14 inches. So we'll drop it down to about 8 inches into there, and that should give the cable a nice arc and a nice bend to come down into the conduit and down to the receptacle. Another thing I did before I commit to this is I took my fish tape and shoved it up through that hole just to make sure there's no obstructions, and that it'll get me right into the attic space of the garage here to drag my cable across to the other side to connect to the panel. So now we'll mount that conduit and the box to these bricks. Okay, and here's just a shot of the front of the house, and that is where the RV sits in relation to the house, and just to the left of that house numbers there, 3174, that's where the receptacle's going to go. Alright, and just in time for the rain to start, I got all my holes drilled. So I got 4 in that box, in the outlet box. It's going to be quite a bit of force when you go pulling out that 30 amp plug out of the receptacle, so it's good I was able to get 4 good screw holes to hold that box. And then going on up, I got 1 strap within 12 inches of the box, and then I've got another strap just up here before it enters into the soffit. So got those screws just started, holes drilled with a cordless drill, hammer drill, and a concrete bit. Got them all started and ready to thread in. So now we'll go inside and we will wire this all up. Alright, so let's get into the meat of the matter here. Let's start putting together that conduit, the PVC junction box, the receptacle, and the in-use weatherproof cover. Okay, I brought this back in from outside now, all ready to go with wiring it up. As you can see now, there's the bell end of that conduit. That's where my cable's going to come down. Now I'm just going to use 8/3 NMD cable, Romex, to run across the attic, and that way I can strip what I need to go down this conduit here and just make sure the jacket slips inside here, and then it'll just be the single conductors running down into the box. And that way I can just use that NMD cable to staple it to the trusses across the attic space up there and down into my panel. So let's go get that cable. We'll measure the appropriate length of wire here that we need to strip, shove it down in, and start hooking up the receptacle and put on that the plate, box, and the in-use weatherproof cover. Okay, so I've got that wire pulled in, the box glued on, cemented onto the conduit. Notice I kept the writing on the conduit to the back. No one needs to see that, it's not pretty. So we've glued that, made sure I turned the printing on the conduit to the rear. Now we can start wiring up our receptacle. Okay, so we're ready to put the receptacle on the outlet box. Here's the one we had to purchase. As I mentioned, you see that NEMA configuration there, the TT30R right here. And you see what I mean by the crowfoot design. That's I'll show you better with the package off. 30 amp flush mount power outlet. This doesn't say that it's specifically for an RV, but they are. So it's back wired. Got your ground terminal, you got your white terminal for neutral, and you've got your hot terminal. We're going to use the black wire here, and we're just going to leave the red wire taped off and tucked into the back of the box. For the future, as I mentioned earlier, if there is a future for that. Here's the in-use weatherproof cover I purchased. Now this is from Leviton. I'll try to get there no glare on it. It's a telescoping plastic white weatherproof cover, 1-gang vertical mount. So that's perfect for me. Although you see on this side, it only came with a Decora faceplate. I've never used one of these before, so we're all going to learn together. So I had to purchase the proper size round faceplate. This one's stainless steel, but that won't matter. It's going to be inside that box. And that's the right size to fit that round hole on that receptacle. So, first thing we got to do is get this ground wire. We're going to orient the plug, the receptacle, I should say, with the ground prong up. And that's because the plug usually is an angle connector on all RVs, and the ground is on the top so that it's an angle plug, 90 degrees, so that the cord will come out the bottom and not be bent up and over, and won't come out of the weatherproof in-use cover properly either. So oriented ground up. You see I've got my ground in this PVC box on the top as well. So we got to bring this ground up and around that terminal. And now this is a fairly thick ground wire, 10 gauge, so we might have to, these are 8, but the ground wire is 10. I'm going to take that screw terminal out and make a nice U-shaped bend around it, tighten that down. So forgive me if my hands get in the way a little bit, but I'm going to try to give you the best possible angle on this. Taking that screw right out. Going to bend me a nice, tight 180 degree bend in this ground wire. A little tighter than that even. And that's pretty good there. And then what I'll do, you don't want it overlapping at all, so I just bent it over 180 degrees now just to make a tighter loop in it. Wrong screwdriver. And I'm not even happy with that, so I'm going to grab a needle nose plier and pinch that a little bit tighter. Okay, so using a needle nose, just going to pinch that even tighter. So that machine screw head fits tightly on the conductor, getting as much contact area as possible. Snug that down nice. Now, test fit this receptacle that the wire is not going to be in the way. And just to be sure, I'm going to bend that ground wire up a little bit towards the top of the box, so nothing's going to be in the way of that receptacle fitting inside the outlet box. So that's ready to connect to the receptacle.
Now we can prepare our white neutral wire. Now stripping these, I use a utility knife. Careful not to nick the conductor. Strip off one side down to the copper. And then I just ring it, but not cutting to the copper, just scoring the insulation, not all the way through. Just enough that when I grab it with the plier, it'll rip off the rest of the way. It's probably a strip gauge on the back of this receptacle. No, there isn't, but just take a good guess at how long you need it to be stripped. And test fit it. You don't want the insulation inside there making the connection. You want copper, so that's perfect. Insulation goes inside, undercover, inside the Bakelite or the plastic here. And the screw terminal will screw down on the copper, not on the insulation. So using that as a guide, we'll strip the black wire. That's the one we'll hook up to the 30 amp breaker. And the red one will be our spare if we ever go to the 50 amp service route. Again, just score that conductor, but not all the way through to the copper. You don't want to nick the wires. And you just peel off that insulation. Do a little fine tuning here. Okay, we're ready to terminate the receptacle. So starting with ground, every time I hook things up, I connect ground first, neutral second, and the hot last. And again, when I disconnect something, I go the opposite way. Disconnect the hot first, neutral second, and the ground last. If the power's off, doesn't really make a difference. It's just a really good habit to get into. Neutral. Now again, I've mentioned this in other videos with stranded conductors. You want to tighten it, then you want to wiggle, because those individual strands can fall off of one another. And as you see, I get another good half a turn on that. And I just realized these screw terminals are actually for a number 3 Robertson. So that's the largest size. Or you could use a standard blade on them. As you can see, there's a standard blade slot. But nothing better than a square drive Robertson. Not so common in the US of A, very common in Canada. Phillips is the standard in the States. Okay, now onto my hot terminal. Again, tighten it, wiggle it. Tighten some more. And there you have it. Ground, neutral, and hot. Now we're going to take this guy off. Again, we're not hooking it to power, but just tape it off anyway. Couldn't find my black tape, so we're getting blue today for electrical tape. Blue is actually called phase identification tape. That would be if you're using a 3-phase system, possibly, and all you've got is black conductors. You'd use phase tape to identify the red and the blue and leave the black as black. Other reasons for it, of course, too, but for phase identification tape. See, I just tucked that back into the back of the box. Now we got to make this guy fit in here without pinching any conductors or having the ground wire bent across and touching the hot terminal. So that just takes a little messing around, especially, like I said, we're using 8-gauge wire here. Only really needs to be 10 if you were just putting a 30 amp service in. which would be solid conductor and a lot in NMD anyway, Romex, but a lot easier to work with than 8 gauge. So I use a little force and push that down in. And then I want to pull it open and check to make sure nothing is pinched. And everything is good inside there. As you can see, ground wire's not stretched across the hot terminal. All right, now I can use my device box screws. They provide 4 of them with it, so we're going to put 4 in here and screw that receptacle into the box. There you go. The receptacle mounted nicely in place with 4 mounting screws. Now let's tackle this weatherproof cover. So here's what they mean by telescoping. You can see those hinges can stretch out to make more room, which we're going to need, I'm sure. Or it can close in a little tighter. Or expand out, where I'm sure we're going to need all the space we can get. Well, full stop now. As you can see, I put the 4 device screws in to mount that receptacle onto the box. And now looking at this plate, the in-use weatherproof cover, I have to have those screws through it first. So we'll take those out, do it over again. This time I'm going to get my drill, be quicker. Okay, so I fixed my little error there, pulled those screws back out and put them through the box cover. As you can see, the gasket's tight along here, tight along here. So when my cover goes on, now we're going to have to make a little bit of a modification, I can see, because as you might notice, we're going to have to, this is designed for the cord to come out on a normal 15 amp cord that's not that grand, not that large, but with the RV plug, that cord's going to come out quite a bit on a tighter angle when it leaves this. The plug is going to come out of the cord is going to come out of the plug on a tighter angle than what we have here to bend up and out through these holes. So I'm going to have to make a small modification here and probably just cut out a little bit of this box so that the RV cord will come off the angle and come right out the bottom, and the lid will close on it for in-use purposes. So that's done on this end. I'll show you that, whatever little modification I have to make when we get a RV plug to put in there. But once we get it mounted on the wall, now's the time to go fish that cable up into the attic and over to the panel, and we'll mount this back on the wall, on the pillar. But now's the time we're going to go out, shove that cable up through into the attic. I'm going to have some help here while I push that cable up, and I'm going to be in the attic. Someone's going to have to push it up through the hole, and I'll pull it up until the conduit slides into place, and then we can screw this assembly to that pillar. And just one step left here now is to put this stainless steel plate on top of that, and it mounts just with the 2 screws into the device, the receptacle itself. So we'll put that on before we go out. Another step I almost forgot, because you see, you almost really don't need it because there's nowhere to stick your fingers inside there with that receptacle in place, but we'll put her in. All right, there you have it with the stainless steel plate on, and now it's complete. Ready to go. All right, so I've brought the entire assembly outside, and all that's left now is to feed this cable up through the hole and pull the entire length in. I'll need somebody out here feeding it up to me once I can't push any more in. And we'll pull it all the way up until the conduit is in place. And I can put my cable straps on and screw the box and the straps to the pillar. So we'll see how far I can push it up on my own. A little bit of sharp edges here with the soffit, so you've got to be careful that I don't damage the sheathing on this cable. That looks like it's about as far as I'm going to get it without having some help feeding. So now it's time to go up in the attic. And I'm probably not going to be able to show you that because I'm not even sure I'll be able to get in through the little access hole I have into the garage truss system myself. I may have to get my Sawzall and cut the hole a little bigger. It depends on how the old beer belly's doing. See if I can squeeze it through. All right, and just to show you the attic access here and what the hole I had to get through, apparently I'm okay. I was able to squeeze myself through that little access hole right beside the chimney for the hot water heater. All right, so all that's left now, we got the cable pulled up through the soffit. And now I just have to mount everything onto the pillar again here. Get all 4 of these started, and then that's it. Strap here, strap up there, and we're done. Outside. And we got to fish that cable into the panel. All right, so there it is, the finished product outside. Box screws in, mounting screws, the conduit straps, both in place. And let's go inside and connect this up. All right, so here we are at the main panel. Now, unfortunately, this isn't really my main panel. This is my demonstration board, but I'm going to show you the connections here because my panel is just too full and cluttered, and where it's mounted, I had no way of getting a camera in there to show you. So this is a much better way to show you exactly how I would make those connections if you were just running a 10-2 with ground, as you would normally for this 30 amp receptacle. You would just simply have your ground wire coming back, mounted, tied into the bus bar, the grounding bus bar that is fastened right to the panel tub. And you can see this particular ground wire for our installation is right here, tied onto that ground screw. And then your neutral would go up to the neutral bus bar, which is isolated from ground but bonded in your main panel, and that's a story for another video. However, here it is here, the neutral tied right onto the neutral bar, and then here's my 30 amp single pole breaker that I would tie the black wire on to that 30 amp breaker. Now, as I said, with a 10-2, you'd be done. With this 8-3 and my future plans to expand that to a RV service panel, we've got that extra hot wire here that I've just taped off. You can see, taped it off so it can't touch anything hot. And we'll just tuck that out of the way in the panel, tie that to the 30 amp, and we're set to go. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Don't forget what I said at the start about the likes, the subscribing, and the clicking of the bell. And right now there's a new feature called a thanks. So if you gave me a thanks, that would be super. And also leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought of this. Let me know what videos you'd like to see in the future, what subjects you'd like me to cover, and ask me a question. I look at all my comments. Thanks again for watching. Terry Peterman, the Internet Electrician.